this movie, I want to look at working with the new adaptive wide-angle filter in Photoshop CS6 and compare how this works using the automatic lens corrections. So to begin with, we have a photograph here which is taken of the Pritzker Pavilion in the center of Chicago, and as you can see, it was shot using a wide-angle lens. And to begin with, I'm going to go to the image menu and choose to duplicate this photograph, which I'm going to do with the Option key held down on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, so we can create an instant copy. And to start with, if I go to the filter menu, I'm going to choose the lens correction filter. And what this does, if there is a lens profile that is being recognized in the XF metadata, then you can see that it will be selected over here in the lens profile section. And if the geometric distortion option is checked at the top here it is, unchecked and checked again. With that checked, then you can see an automatic lens correction being applied to the photograph, which attempts to straighten out all the lines in the image based on the knowledge contained within the lens profile that describes the geometric distortion qualities of that particular lens. So to begin with, let me just click OK to apply that to this photograph and then come back to the original so that we can now create another duplicate, which we can then compare with the lens corrected version. So with this second duplicate version, let me go to the filter menu again and choose now the new adaptive wide angle filter option. And this opens the filter dialog you can see here. And straight away you'll notice that it does apply a kind of automatic lens correction to the image. We can see before and after by toggling on the preview box at the bottom. It's just not quite as corrective or as aggressive as the lens correction filter version was. And this is our starting point that you have to work with when you've got the auto option selected up here when working in the adaptive wide angle filter. And the objective here is to selectively apply perspective correction to the image using one of the Constraint Tool options up here, starting with the Constraint Tool that is selected by default. And you can use this to define the areas that you want to see being perspective corrected, so that only those areas will actually be filtered or corrected using the filter. And in between the corrections or the constraints that you apply, the puppet warp technology comes into play to create just the right amount of distortion between those points. So the idea is to apply just enough distortion correction to the image to correct it without applying an overall correction, which is what you're effectively doing when using the lens correction filter. I don't know if that explains it completely enough. I do go into more detail in the book, of course, but let's just show you how this works in operation by adding a single constraint to correct for the horizontal lines. So I'm going to click here to start off with, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, move the mouse across the image, and you can see the curve that's a line that appears here. This is using the lens profile information, which knows exactly how the lens has distorted the horizontal line here. So I'll just click to simply apply that constraint, and you can see now that the image warps according to that constraint, and the line that I followed there has now become perfectly straight. And all I need to really do is just extend that slightly to the edges on the right and over here on the left. And you can see that dotted red line. That tells you that you've entered into illegal territory, so that you need to back off from there and just be really careful to make sure that, in this case, that the line remains yellow. And that's the first constraint applied. Now, using still the Constraint Tool, I can then apply vertical constraints. And I'll do that by hovering up to moving up to the top here. And you can see in the detail panel over on the right that wherever you place the cursor, you can see in a large view in that detail preview. So I'm going to click at the top there of that building and then move the cursor down, holding the Shift key to change it from a blue constraint line to the magenta one that we see now. That indicates that I'm now applying a vertical constraint, and I'm going to drag all the way down here to the bottom and click OK, and you can see there's our first vertical constraint being applied to the image. Now, when correcting architectural shots such as this, you can apply a perfect vertical constraint, but I think that sometimes it's better to actually allow the verticals to converge just slightly. It looks a little bit artificial if they're too regular. So if you move the cursor up to one of these handles here, as you can see I'm doing at the moment, you can then drag with the mouse just to sort of apply a slight angle to that vertical constraint line. And you can see how much. At the moment I'm applying roughly an 88-degree correction, and that adjusts the image again. So now, instead of the building being completely straight, it's now just converging in just very slightly. Let me now add in another vertical constraint, and I'll come over to this building over here on the left, hold down the Shift key again, and then just follow with the line and click, and that straightens up that building over there. And here again, I think I should adjust the angle slightly. So if I hover over that cursor and click, and then just drag this time the other direction. So I want to just give it about a 92-degree roughly angle, just to sort of tilt that in slightly. And then there are these other buildings where they're still curved. So if I click to correct those, again I'll apply a vertical constraint, adjust the angle there again a little bit, and this building too, again with the Shift key held down, and I'll leave that one completely straight. And you can see that just by adding a few constraint lines to this image, we've now got to the stage where I think that the photograph is now beginning to look pretty good. If I look at the scale slider here, I can zoom in on the image a little bit by zooming in, because I do need to end up cropping this photograph. So I can adjust the scale at this stage, then click OK. And to finish it off, I need to select the crop tool and then just drag on the handles to crop the image. And then drag in on the top handle and the one at the bottom, and then click enter to apply that. And now we can do a comparison between this edited version using the adaptive wide angle filter and the other version that I created. So if we now look at the lens correction image, you can see that was using the automatic lens correction, straightening all the lines, but I don't think looks anywhere near as good as the version I created using the adaptive wide angle filter. And then let's look also at the original image that we started with. And of the three, again, I think that looking at this image, that this produces a version which, to my mind, looks pretty close to how I remember seeing the original scene. The Pritzker Pavilion does actually overhang the audience slightly. This is how it really looks in real life, or at least how I remembered it. And I think the problem with using the auto lens corrected version is that although it straightens the lines, it really doesn't give you the same sort of sense of perspective as I saw in the original version. So of the three, using the new adaptive wide angle filter, I think there's a great potential now for photographers to be able to create more realistic looking scenes from photographs shot using wide angle lenses. So that concludes this basic introduction into working with this filter, but there is also another movie which is recorded and available on this website, and here I'm going to show how you can actually use the adaptive wide angle filter to create images that have been created using the photo merge feature in Photoshop CS6.